My teacher's secret. The chalk hit the blackboard with a sharp, rhythmic clack that commanded absolute silence. In room 204, there was no whispering, no passing of notes, no drifting gazes toward the large oak-framed windows. Mr. Leonard Hale did not demand attention. He extracted it through a sheer, suffocating gravity that he carried with him like a heavy winter coat. He was a man carved from old wood, standing perfectly rigid in his tailored gray suits. His silver-flecked hair parted meticulously to one side. At 48, he looked as though he had bypassed youth entirely, arriving in the world with a stern jaw, a vast encyclopedia of historical dates, and a profound intolerance for the trivialities of teenage life. Ethan Moore sat in the third row, his pen hovering over a spiral-bound notebook. At 16, Ethan possessed a quiet disposition that often made him invisible to his peers, a trait he considered his greatest advantage. He was an observer, a cataloger of human nuances. While the rest of the sophomore class saw Mr. Hale as a pedagogical tyrant, Ethan saw a man meticulously maintaining a fortress. He noticed the way Mr. Hale's left hand, marked by a pale, jagged scar across the back of his knuckles, always remained hidden in his pocket when he lectured. He noticed that Mr. Hale never sat at his desk, as if lingering in a chair might invite a moment of unwanted relaxation. And he noticed the eyes, pale, flinty blue, and completely devoid of warmth, like the surface of a frozen lake. It was mid-November, and the sky outside the tall classroom windows was the color of bruised iron. The radiators clanked and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the damp autumn chill settling over the brick bones of the high school. Mr. Hale was lecturing on the industrial disasters of the 20th century, his baritone voice echoing off the linoleum floors. "The Aberfan disaster of 1966, Mr. Hale said, turning from the board, the chalk dust settling onto the cuffs of his dark jacket. A catastrophic collapse of a colliery spoil tip. It was, essentially, an avalanche of coal waste." He walked slowly down the center aisle. The students stiffened as he passed. Ethan watched Mr. Hale's rigid posture, the way his eyes fixed on the back wall rather than on any individual student. "A failure of oversight," Mr. Hale continued, his voice steady, metronomic. "A failure of the authorities to recognize the instability of the terrain. But history is not merely a record of structural failures. It is a ledger of the human cost paid for those failures. 144 people died. 116 of them were children." Mr. Hale paused. It was a microscopic hesitation, no longer than a skipped heartbeat, but to Ethan, who was watching him intently, it was as loud as a gunshot. Mr. Hale's jaw muscles feathered. His gaze dropped from the back wall to the scuffed linoleum beneath his polished shoes. For a second, his shoulders lost their military bearing, slumping imperceptibly before snapping back into place. He walked back to his desk, picked up a primary source document, and began to read a survivor's account. But halfway through the first paragraph, his voice, usually an unwavering instrument of authority, fractured. A slight tremor betrayed the syllable of a word. He cleared his throat violently, placed the paper face down on the desk, and looked up. The ice in his eyes had cracked, revealing something dark, chaotic, and desperately suppressed. "Read chapter 14, Mr. Hale said abruptly. "We will discuss the legislative aftermath tomorrow." He sat down at his desk, a rarity that sent a ripple of unease through the room. The class, relieved but bewildered, opened their textbooks. Ethan did not read. He kept his eyes on Mr. Hale, who was staring fixedly at the frosted glass of the classroom door, his scarred left hand gripping the edge of the mahogany desk so tightly his knuckles were white. When the bell rang, the students filed out in a hurried, hushed rush. Ethan lingered, taking an unnecessary amount of time to cap his pen and arrange his notebooks. As he stood up, he saw Mr. Hale slide a small, faded photograph from beneath the edge of his leather desk blotter. The teacher looked at it for only a second before slipping it quickly into the breast pocket of his jacket. The movement was protective, almost painful. Ethan walked out into the crowded hallway, the noise of slamming lockers and teenage chatter washing over him. The image of the stern, untouchable history teacher gripping the edge of his desk remained burned into Ethan's mind. There was a story there, buried deep beneath layers of discipline and distance. During his free period the next day, Ethan retreated to his sanctuary, the school library. It was a cavernous space in the oldest wing of the building, smelling of floor wax, vanilla, and the sweet decay of aging paper. The librarian, Clara Bennett, was a woman in her early 50s who wore brightly patterned cardigans and possessed an uncanny ability to know exactly what a student needed before they asked. She had warm, crinkling eyes and a soft, perceptive manner that made the library a safe harbor for the school's introverts. "You're brooding, Ethan," Clara said softly as she pushed a squeaking metal cart of returned books down the aisle where Ethan was pretending to read a novel. Ethan looked up, offering a small, apologetic smile. "Just thinking, Mrs. Bennett. Dangerous pastime," she noted, stopping the cart and picking up a heavy tome on European history. She expertly slid it onto the shelf. "Is it an English essay? Or are you constructing one of your stories in your head again? I know that look. You're dissecting someone." Ethan closed his book. "Have you known Mr. Hale a long time?" Clara's hands paused on the spine of a book. The casual warmth in her expression gave way to a quiet, guarded sorrow. She looked down the aisle to ensure they were alone, the dust motes dancing in the slanted shafts of afternoon sunlight. "I was here when he was hired 20 years ago," she said softly. "Was he always so strict?" Clara sighed, leaning slightly against the metal shelving. "Leonard has always been a man who prefers order to chaos. But when he first arrived, he was just quiet. The strictness, the walls he puts up, those grew thicker over time, like scar tissue." Ethan thought of the pale line across Mr. Hale's hand. "He was talking about Aberfan yesterday. He lost his place. I've never seen him lose his place." Clara looked at Ethan with a mixture of fondness and apprehension. She recognized the sharp empathy in the boy, the writer's instinct to pull at a loose thread until the fabric unraveled. "Ethan, some people build walls because they are hiding a treasure. Others build them because they are trying to keep a monster locked inside. Mr. Hale is keeping a very profound grief locked away. Be careful not to pick the lock just to see what's behind the door." "I'm not looking for gossip," Ethan said earnestly. It just felt like he was alone in a crowded room. "I wanted to understand why." Clara watched him for a long moment. Then, she reached onto the bottom shelf of her cart and pulled out a worn, hardcover copy of a book. It wasn't a history text, but a collection of mid-century American poetry. "He left this on the reading table this morning. He usually checks it out once a year right around this time. November. I was just about to reshelve it." She held it out to Ethan. "Maybe it will satisfy your curiosity." Ethan took the book. The cloth cover was frayed at the corners. He opened it carefully. On the inside cover, written in fading blue ink, was an inscription. "To Leo, because you always remember the words I forget. Keep watching out for me. Tommy, 1993. Ethan traced the name with his eyes. Leo. It felt entirely wrong to associate that soft, affectionate nickname with the unyielding Mr. Leonard Hale. And Tommy, a brother, a friend? As Ethan turned the page, a piece of paper slipped from the binding and fluttered to the floor. Ethan stooped to pick it up. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age, carefully laminated to preserve it. Ethan read the headline, and the chill of the library seemed to seep directly into his bones. Tragedy at Blackwood Quarry. Local teenager drowns in ice accident. December 2nd, 1995. Ethan's eyes raced over the blurred, microscopic print. The article detailed a weekend hiking trip taken by a group of local high school students. A sudden drop in temperature. A frozen quarry lake. A 14-year-old boy named Thomas Hale who had ventured too far out onto the thin ice. The ice had shattered. The final paragraph hit Ethan like a physical blow. Rescuers noted the heroic but tragic efforts of Thomas's older brother, Leonard Hale, 18, who plunged into the freezing water in a desperate attempt to locate the boy beneath the ice. The older Hale sustained severe lacerations to his hands and arms from the jagged ice and had to be treated for severe hypothermia. Thomas Hale's body was recovered 2 hours later. Ethan stared at the fragile piece of paper. The puzzle pieces violently snapped into place. The scar on Mr. Hale's hand. The absolute refusal to tolerate disorder or rule-breaking. The physical reaction to a history lesson about children dying due to structural failure and a lack of oversight. "Keep watching out for me," the inscription had read. And Leonard Hale, the older brother tasked with watching out, had failed. Ethan carefully placed the clipping back into the book, exactly where he had found it, and handed it back to Clara. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Clara took the book, her eyes deeply sympathetic. "He blames himself," Ethan whispered. "Every single day for 30 years, Clara replied softly. "He became a teacher because he thinks if he can just maintain enough control, if he can impart enough discipline, he can keep you all safe. He loves his students, Ethan. He just loves them by refusing to let them fall." For the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere in room 204 felt profoundly different to Ethan. The rest of the class still groaned internally at the endless dates, the rigorous pop quizzes, the icy reprimands for a slouching posture or a whispered comment. But Ethan saw the man behind the podium with entirely new eyes. When Mr. Hale chastised a student for not paying attention, Ethan heard the echo of a terrified 18-year-old boy yelling at his younger brother to be careful. When Mr. Hale paced the aisles, his scarred hand safely tucked away, Ethan saw a man carrying the invisible, crushing weight of a ghost. The history teacher was not a tyrant. He was a guardian who lived in perpetual terror of the ice breaking again. The climax of the semester was a major research paper. The prompt was broad. Analyze the long-term sociological impact of a specific historical tragedy. Most students chose the sinking of the Titanic, the Hindenburg disaster, or the Great Chicago Fire. Ethan sat at his desk in his bedroom for 3 nights, staring at a blank Word document. He wanted to write something real. He wanted to write about the secondary casualties of tragedy, the survivors who live out their days in the shadow of an event that ended someone else's life but quietly ruined theirs. He titled his paper, "The Geography of Guilt: Survivor's Burden in the Wake of Preventable Tragedy." He used the Aberfan disaster as his historical anchor, but the thematic core of the essay was deeply personal, woven with empathy and quiet observation. He wrote about the nature of time for a survivor, how a single afternoon can trap a person forever, forcing them to live the rest of their lives in a state of suspended animation. He wrote about the scars left behind, both the visible ones worn on the hands and the invisible ones etched into the spirit. He wrote about how society demands that survivors move on, failing to understand that for the survivor, keeping the memory alive, even through guilt, is the only way to keep the lost person close. Ethan poured his soul into the words, terrified of crossing a line, but feeling a profound compulsion to let Mr. Hale know, in the only language they shared, that he was seen, not judged, seen. He handed the paper in on a Friday. For the next week, a heavy anxiety sat in Ethan's chest. He watched Mr. Hale during class, looking for any sign, any subtle shift in demeanor. But the teacher remained an impenetrable fortress of gray wool and rigid posture. On Thursday afternoon, as the dismissal bell rang and the stampede of students pushed toward the exits, Mr. Hale spoke. "Mr. Moore, a moment of your time, please." The classroom emptied rapidly. Ethan packed his bag with agonizing slowness. The winter sun was already setting, casting long, gray shadows across the linoleum. The rhythmic hiss of the radiator was the only sound in the room. Ethan slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked to the front of the room. Mr. Hale was sitting at his desk. Ethan's essay lay perfectly centered on the leather blotter. There were no red marks on it, no grade at the top. Mr. Hale did not look up immediately. He stared at the title page. The silence stretched, heavy and fraught. When he finally raised his head, the flinty blue eyes were red-rimmed, though his expression remained terrifyingly neutral. "This is an exceptional piece of writing, Ethan," Mr. Hale said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its classroom projection. "It is meticulously researched and profoundly articulate." "Thank you, sir," Ethan managed to whisper. Mr. Hale slowly reached out and touched the edge of the paper. His left hand. The pale scar gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the classroom. He didn't pull the hand back this time. He let it rest there. It is also dangerously perceptive, Mr. Hale continued, his voice tightening. A historian's job is to observe the past objectively. A writer's job is to bleed onto the page. You have blurred the line here. You are dissecting a pain that is deeply specific. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't mean to cross a line, Mr. Hale. I just wanted to explore the idea that the people who survive a tragedy are victims of it, too, and that maybe they shouldn't have to carry the blame forever. Mr. Hale's jaw clenched. He looked away, turning his gaze toward the darkening window. The snow had begun to fall, tiny white flakes swirling violently in the wind against the glass. It is easy to theorize about guilt when you are 16, Ethan, Mr. Hale said softly, the harshness gone from his voice, replaced by an exhaustion so bone-deep it made him look 10 years older. It is easy to write beautiful prose about forgiveness. It is another thing entirely to stand on the edge of a frozen lake, holding a rope that went slack, knowing you were the one who told him the ice was safe. The words hung in the air, a devastating confession shattering 3 decades of carefully cultivated silence. Ethan's breath hitched. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell his teacher that it wasn't his fault, because he knew those words would be meaningless against the monolithic weight of Mr. Hale's guilt. Instead, Ethan leaned slightly forward, his voice steady and remarkably gentle. I read an inscription in a book in the library, Ethan confessed quietly. A poetry book. From Tommy. Mr. Hale closed his eyes. A single, shuddering breath escaped his lips. The fortress crumbled, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet, devastating subsidence. The rigid shoulders bowed. The hands that strictly enforced discipline across hundreds of students now trembled slightly against the desk. He was 14, Mr. Hale whispered to the empty room, to the snow against the window, to the ghost he had carried for 25 years. He was brilliant, much brighter than me. He wanted to be a botanist. He loved everything that grew. Mr. Hale opened his eyes and looked down at his scarred hand. I was supposed to watch out for him. I was the older brother. It was my one job, and I failed. Every day I walk into this school, I see his face in the hallways. I see him in the boy who forgets his homework, in the boy who laughs too loudly at a joke, in the boy who stares out the window dreaming of anywhere else. He looked up at Ethan, the vulnerability in his eyes entirely unguarded now. I demand perfection in this room, Ethan, because perfection is predictable. If you follow the rules, if you stay on the path, the ice doesn't break. I cannot bear to watch the ice break again. The raw honesty of it anchored Ethan to the floor. He saw the tragic, beautiful paradox of Leonard Hale, a man who punished himself by refusing to live fully, yet dedicated his life to protecting the futures of thousands of other children in the only way he knew how. Mr. Hale, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion but unwavering. You didn't fail, Tommy, because you made a mistake on the ice. You were a kid, too, and you've spent your whole life since then watching out for the rest of us. You've been keeping us on the safe path. I think he would be proud of the man who remembers the words he forgot. Mr. Hale stared at Ethan. A heavy, profound silence blanketed the room, drowning out the hiss of the radiator and the howl of the wind outside. For the first time since Ethan had known him, Mr. Hale did not look like a teacher assessing a student. He looked like a man who had been walking in a blizzard for 30 years and had finally been offered a place by the fire. A tear, bright and heavy, broke free and traced a slow path down the deep lines of Mr. Hale's face. He didn't wipe it away. He simply nodded, a slow, fractional movement of his head. He looked down at Ethan's essay, took a red pen from his drawer, and wrote a single grade at the top of the page. He slid the paper across the desk. Go home, Ethan, Mr. Hale said quietly, his voice carrying a strange, fragile peace. The roads will be getting bad. Ethan took the paper. He looked at the top. There was an A, and beneath it, written in Mr. Hale's meticulous, archaic script, were 2 words. Thank you. Good night, Mr. Hale, Ethan said softly. Good night, Mr. Moore. Ethan walked out of the classroom, his footsteps echoing in the dim, empty hallway. When he reached the end of the corridor, he paused and looked back. Through the small glass window of the door to room 204, Ethan saw Mr. Hale. He wasn't grading papers. He wasn't staring blankly at the wall. He had taken the faded photograph from his breast pocket and laid it on the desk in front of him. And for the first time, Leonard Hale was not clenching his jaw against the memory. He was simply looking at his brother, allowing the grief to exist not as a weapon of self-punishment, but as an act of enduring love. The winter storm raged outside, burying the school in cold and darkness. But inside, as Ethan pushed through the double doors and headed out into the snow, he felt a profound warmth. A secret had not been exposed. It had been shared. And in that sharing, the long, bitter winter of one man's soul had finally begun to thaw.